A narrative far less enthralling than its public image lurks behind the majestic walls of Balmoral Castle, a location frequently portrayed as the tranquil retreat of the royal family. The castle has long been associated with refined culture and old-world charm, but some of its own employees were hiding secrets that would shock the globe at large. The former housekeepers didn't just up and leave. Their departures cast doubt on the idyllic royal lifestyle and exposed disturbing realities. Come along as we reveal the unsettling reasons for the departure of these housekeepers from Balmoral Castle. Unveiling the hidden glamour of Balmoral Castle. Balmoral Castle appears to be a magical, fantastical place at first sight. It has long been recognized as the most exclusive retreat for the royal family, situated in the Scottish Highlands, with its expansive highlands, dense woodlands, and frigid rivers. Balmoral is very much more than a mere estate to many. You may say it exemplifies regal perfection. Still, there's a lot more nuance to the reality. A past that isn't usually portrayed in polished photos or official papers hides behind the stone walls and meticulously guarded gates. Since Queen Victoria and Prince Albert bought it as a retreat in the mid-80s, the royal family has owned Balmoral. The original intention of Balmoral was to provide as a retreat from the hectic political tasks and ceremonial that plagued other castles. Living among the animals and riding horses across the moors gave the royal family a sense of more natural living than they had in Buckingham Palace. The Highlands were originally called Paradise by Victoria herself. The family still thinks it's the closest they get to a normal existence there. Castle life was anything but easy for the crew, despite how beautiful it seemed from the outside. Long hours and continual strain were endured by the maids, cooks, and butlers as they meticulously performed unending rituals. Many servants felt the job was more difficult, lonely, and demanding than the public ever imagined, even though serving royalty seemed like an ideal job to onlookers. The contrast is what makes Balmoral stand out. The beauty and strictness of it are equally overwhelming. The family may have loved spending time on the estate fishing or grilling, but the staff had to adhere to strict regulations. Everything had to be executed with regimentation. The beds had to be made to order, the uniforms pressed to perfection. We tend to imagine castles as joyful places. Those residing in the servants' quarters, however, may have experienced quite different realities. Separated from loved ones, subject to unrelenting scrutiny, and obligated to uphold customs passed down through the years. The allure of Balmoral made many employees wonder if the sacrifices they were making by serving there were worthwhile. Photos of the Queen walking her dogs or her family, assembled for summer visits, were the only things shown to the outside world. On the other hand, those on the inside had a different perspective. These mysterious occurrences are particularly unsettling because they show how little the general public knows about the people who reside in Balmoral. This is more than simply a royal vacation house. Everything about this region is polar opposite. Hot and cold, free and confined, beautiful and heavy. The employees had to deal with the disparities on a daily basis. While some departed with happy recollections, others took with them secrets they seldom shared. The world started to see that even in the most picturesque places, there may be shadows lurking in the corners when some of those secrets eventually came to light. The unsung heroes who kept Balmoral running are just as much a part of the royal family's history as the royal family itself. Their underappreciated opinions reveal more about the fortress than any postcard could. Beyond the building's rich history, there is much more to Balmoral that you were unaware of. Those who lived and worked there have their stories left unsaid. After you figure out this secret, the question becomes obvious. What more secrets could a palace be keeping, if it can appear stunning on the outside while concealing such heavy loads within? At that point, the plot thickens around a palace that is both beautiful and hides mysteries that no one saw coming. Despite its renown, this mansion conceals dark mysteries. For as long as anybody can remember, the royal family's private residence at Balmoral Castle has been a recognized jewel. Warm colors, expansive green hills that seem to go on forever, summer lunches under the royal tent, and pictures of happy monarchs strolling through flower-filled gardens are how the public sees it. For many years, media portrayals of Balmoral have portrayed the royal family's retreat from the rigors of duty as a warm and welcoming home. It appears to be the only area where their lives are somewhat normal from the outside. However, many familiar with the castle's inner workings could attest that it was far from picture-perfect in actuality. Symbolic of tradition is the castle itself. Constructed from grey granite and enveloped by some of the most breathtaking scenery in Scotland, it bears the burden of history. The royal couple envisioned Balmoral as a refuge from the rigors of court life, a place where rigid protocol might give way to more casual expressions of emotion. Even though they were initially put up to provide a sense of security, The walls eventually became symbols of responsibility and demands. The breathtaking scenery of the mountains frequently clashed with the demanding nature of the staff's duties. Balmoral was a symbol of the royal family's independence in the eyes of the public, but the servants and employees often perceived it as a prison. The castle's inhabitants lived in constant paradox. Beauty on the one hand was impossible to ignore. The sunbeams streaming in through the large windows, the trickle of the River Dee close, and the faraway stag call reverberating across the hills. The converse was also true. There was a heavy stillness, a seemingly endless set of regulations, and the unceasing reminder of one's position in the rigid chain of command. It was imperative that all smiles given to members of the royal family be sincere, that all duties be carried out flawlessly, and that all emotions be set aside. A servant or maid who was even slightly tardy ran the danger of not only being scolded, but also having their reputation tarnished forever. The all-consuming nature of such a life is frequently overlooked in fairy tale depictions. Close quarters, separated from their families, and the lifestyles they led before joining the royal household were common for staff members. Their days started well before dawn and went far into the night, and they were so regimented that they barely had time to think for themselves. The royal family's outdoor barbecues, horseback excursions, and lengthy country walks would not have been possible without the unobtrusive help of the attendants. Long, exhausting hours were regularly endured by those working in silence just out of sight, despite the joy depicted in images. Some former employees have spoken of Balmoral in hushed tones, describing it as both a challenging workplace and an endurance test. It was more than just manual work. The emotional toll of service under continual scrutiny was the central theme. Many people lived in constant terror because of the strict discipline and the fact that mistakes were not forgiven lightly. Dread of seeming foolish, dread of not measuring up, dread of being demoted from what was ostensibly the most esteemed household in Britain. There was a less appealing side to the opulence of Balmoral, a world of pressure where one's fate was decided by the tiniest detail. The fact that the location, which is often portrayed as a royal paradise, could actually feel like a prison to the people who worked there is what makes the contrast all the more noticeable. Most people outside the castle's walls would never guess that beneath its elegant facade were darkness. Those shadows became increasingly heavy over time, especially for the maids. A number of them started to wonder if their loyalty was actually valued, or if they were just props in an endless royal spectacle. As one delves deeper into these unspoken narratives, it becomes increasingly evident that the picturesque setting of Balmoral served as both a stage for celebration and a veil for suffering. It was easy to forget about the weariness on the inside due to the magnificent exterior. Pictures of happy people diverted attention away from the sobs that were shed in private rooms. Even though the castle was still seen by many as a symbol of tranquility, for those who lived there, it took on the exact opposite meaning. A location where the weight of anticipation and quiet prevailed over the beauty of the natural surroundings. It is impossible to tell the Balmoral narrative without mentioning this gap between appearances and truth. It serves as a poignant reminder that hidden depths might conceal mysteries, even in the most beloved locations, and unseen weights can be carried by even the most beautiful. The significance of this hidden world to the individuals who experienced it on a daily basis, however, is arguably the most illuminating aspect of it. I often wondered what it was really like to work behind the scenes at Balmoral, away from the cameras and the glitz, in the dark and obscured areas where the reality was more difficult to conceal. We get to the meat of the issue with that question. Everything that went on behind the scenes as the keepers of the castle went about their daily work, and the hidden struggles they faced. What goes on behind the scenes at the castle? It appears like a rural vacation from the outside, all cozy and inviting. Entering the castle's staff quarters, however, paints a drastically different picture than what the public perceives. Behind those majestic doors, there existed a routine that was hard, demanding, and frequently lonely. Working maids didn't get to enjoy the breathtaking scenery of the Highlands. It was all about serving for hours on end according to regulations that would never budge. Before the sun came up, every morning started. In their humble quarters, hidden away in the wing reserved for servants, maids would rise silently. There was minimal opportunity for introspection or solace. They were compelled to attend to the castle itself, stripping and remaking beds, lighting fireplaces, and polishing metal until it shone were all necessary tasks. We swept the floors, pressed the uniforms, and dusted every nook and cranny. An earful from a superior could result from the tiniest slip-up. Plus, with the system in place, The consequences of even a small slip-up were severe. We didn't set out to be perfect. Everyone was anticipating it. There was a lot of mental and physical labor involved. It was not uncommon for maids to spend months away from their families. Visits were uncommon, and letters sent home could be late. Isolating despite its splendor, the castle might be a lonely place. A continual reminder of how isolated they were from the outer world was the quiet of its lengthy corridors. The constant sense of being watched, by superiors, by co-workers, and by the weight of tradition, persisted even during the few times of respite. The castle seemed to be watching over everything. Another aspect of Balmoral life that served as a reminder of the hierarchy was the distribution of meals. Staff members ate separately, frequently in rushed shifts before getting back to work, while members of the royal family had elaborately prepared meals. Contact with the aristocracy was minimal, and when it did happen, it was expected to be polite. Implicit norms governed every action and expression. The gulf between the two classes was more than just a matter of professional competence. It was fundamental, permeating all aspects of everyday living. Still, there were glimmers of humanity within this inflexible framework. After a hard day, some employees found solace in looking at each other and sharing looks of tiredness. Others found solace in whispered chats in the halls, where laughing briefly shattered the silence. Quiet friendships developed among the inmates as they came to terms with the fact that no one outside the castle walls could possibly understand what it was like to be a part of that community. The burden of the labor was alleviated by these moments of connection. In a disciplined environment, nevertheless, they were delicate passing sparks. Over time, the emotional toll of being in that kind of setting became more burdensome. Serving in the royal household was a source of genuine pride for numerous maids. Such a position was rare. However, the exhaustion from seemingly endless days and the want to see faraway family could not be erased by pride. Even for the people whose jobs it was to dust chandeliers and iron linens, the grandeur that beheld it from the outside was sometimes lost in the details. Instead of a castle of fantasies, Balmoral was a sight of serene perseverance in their eyes. The castle is shown in its most authentic form by this existence behind closed walls, on stage for kings and queens, but also as a place of employment for scores of unseen people whose lives were characterized by servitude. The public saw Balmoral as a representation of liberty and family heritage. It was a constant reminder of the staff's duty. The issue of whether they could keep working in such conditions became less important to many as time passed. It came down to how much longer they could take until they snapped. For the simple reason that when things get too much, people tend to just disappear. That is precisely what transpired to a number of the housekeepers whose tales would subsequently reverberate well beyond the stone walls of Balmoral. They were compelled to make a decision after their silent battles: remain hidden or take flight to regain their independence. At that tipping point, amid the maids' wordless efforts, the story takes a grim turn. Reasons why leaving was their sole option. Leaving Balmoral Castle was not an easy choice for many of the maids who had worked there. It meant passing up a chance at the most esteemed position a young British lady could ever hope to hold. The social prestige and honor that came with having a daughter employed by the royal household was a source of great pride for many families. But there was a truth that, once exposed, could not be ignored beneath that honor. Their physical and mental well-being, as well as their identity, were being drained by the job. Resigning meant more than just walking away. Just staying alive was the goal. Gradually, almost undetected, the pressure rose up. When the maids first arrived to Balmoral, they were filled with wonder by the grandeur and size of the estate. It was hard to fathom the idea of cooking for kings and queens and serving them elaborate banquets. The luster, however, started to wane as the weeks and months passed, and the long days melted into one another. An unprecedented amount of pressure from seemingly endless demands, strict regulations, and hidden expectations was exerted on them. After a long day, we'd wake up every morning with a nagging feeling in our guts and aching hands and backs. Among the most intolerable aspects of living at Balmoral was the apparent lack of modernity within its confines. Balmoral opted for tradition over advancement during an era when many British houses were using washing machines, vacuum cleaners, and electricity to make housework easier. For example, meticulous ironing, scrubbing, and rinsing were all part of the hand-washing process for royal linens, uniforms, and clothing. Just picture yourself, your fingertips sore and red from standing in cold water for hours on end, all the while knowing that the next day will bring the same mountain of work. Regular households were finding the relief of machines outside the castle. It seemed as if the servants were trapped to a different era within Balmoral. In terms of cleanliness, the same held true. Without contemporary vacuums or gadgets, It was necessary to keep immaculate rooms, interminable staircases, and vast halls. On one knee, the floors were cleansed. Each corner was hand-polished until it shined, and the fires were reset and cleaned by hand. Because the castle was so massive, construction seemed to go on forever, which only made matters worse. Another component was already requiring servicing when the first one was completed. Even though the staff's health was in jeopardy, the weight of tradition insisted on doing things the old way. The tasks of cooking and preparing food were not without their challenges. Providing the royal family and their guests with a meal necessitated arduous manual work due to the lack of contemporary culinary amenities. Scrubbing the pots without the use of detergents, which would have made the task easier, was just one of the many meticulous preparation steps that had to be up to pace. The workers felt as though the castle was trying to fight modernity on purpose, making them do things that machines could have done the heavy lifting for them. There was a devastating emotional toll on top of the physical weariness. A number of housekeepers mentioned feeling as if they were mere shadows, floating silently in the background. Their hard work was mostly ignored. People seldom ever recalled their names. Their work was vital to the castle's success, yet they were hardly appreciated for being there. Their spirits were worn down by the combination of being unseen and the relentless grind of antiquated ways. Eventually, they felt that leaving was the only way to breathe freely again. The guilt associated with giving up was the most difficult aspect. Returning home after leaving Balmoral frequently left them bereft of a future and disappointing family who had respected their work. In the vain hope that the burden would eventually subside, some persisted for much too long, but that was unusual. The decision of whether to stay or go had become meaningless for the majority. They had to decide whether to put their health at risk or give in to the pressure. They felt a mixture of relief and regret when they eventually left. I felt like a failure when I stepped down from that esteemed position. I felt relief because I'd finally made the choice to prioritize myself over a system that demanded sacrifice without providing any real benefits. They did not merely resign. They departed. They were nonverbal forms of defiance, proclamations that their worth was paramount over custom. And when word got out about what they were up to, it shocked everyone. In what ways could a revered location conceal such adversity? Balmoral is a place of beauty and tranquility. How come its employees felt confined there? When the truth was finally disclosed, it would forever change the perception of the castle and put an end to those disturbing questions. The shocking reality they were unable to conceal any longer. For a long time, the departures of the housekeepers from Balmoral Castle were dismissed as ordinary. Staff turnover was commonplace in royal residences, and the truth remained concealed behind polished windows and stone walls because those who departed remained silent. However, there is a limit to how long one can stay silent. The picture that emerged when former maids started to speak up was more disturbing than anybody had anticipated. Darkness lurked beneath the idyllic exterior of the Queen's summer palace, where servants endured unrelenting pressure, emotional tolls, and a system seemingly designed to deplete them. Not only was the workload extremely heavy, but that wasn't the most shocking truth. The maids felt like cogs in a machine rather than human beings due to the culture of invisibility. A lot of people talked about having to get up before the sun came up and stay up late with no breaks whatsoever. Strict restrictions governed their every move, and the slightest infraction may result in severe reprimands. Some people compared it more to slavery than work. They thought their identities were being eroded in exchange for conformity and submission. My pain was made worse by my loneliness. Even though Balmoral was bustling with visitors during royal visits, the workers likely felt as alone as they might have been anywhere else. Miles of open Scottish wildness encircled the castle, stunning visually yet emotionally isolating. It was common for young women to find the separation from their family to be intolerable. A castle that millions of people admired was their home, but they were forgotten too, concealed in obscure areas that went unnoticed. Their spirits were dwindling due to the breakup, and they began to feel like they had no choice but to go. The emotional burden of continual comparison made it much more difficult to disregard these facts. As the royal family sunk into periods of joy, laughing, and unity, the staff was supposed to observe, frequently from a distance. It was a brutal contrast. As the royals enjoyed their picnics and rode their horses across the hills, the invisible and unrecognized maids toiled away in the background, their labor going unnoticed and unappreciated. It served as a constant reminder that they were on the outside looking into a world they had contributed to, but could never fully become a part of. Further, some accounts hinted at encounters that were almost embarrassing. Dignity was frequently sacrificed in this setting due to harsh language, unrealistic demands, and the unwritten rule that feelings should be kept buried. Months of devotion could be ruined by a single slip-up, making maids feel worthless and useless. The tranquil atmosphere, expansive grounds, and stately halls of Balmoral were starkly contrasted with the harrowing realities of the people who were responsible for its upkeep. These realities, however, did not emerge suddenly. Whispered discussions, memoirs, and the extraordinary bravery of the willing all contributed to their gradual emergence. They presented Balmoral as a sanctuary for the royal family, but also as a location where the caretakers of the estate had to make sacrifices behind the scenes to keep it shining. The flawlessness of the castle was constructed on hidden expenditures, and the departing maids bore the burden of those costs even after they departed. The public found out about these information, and it was upsetting. The myth of the Queen's tranquil retreat in Balmoral has persisted for a long time. The maids, on the other hand, had frequently experienced its polar opposite, a setting characterized by loneliness, quiet sorrow, and weariness. They were no longer just resigning, they were leaving. They served as red flags that something was seriously amiss behind the surface of the royal family's perfect image. Hence, a query started reverberating outside the fortress walls. What other aspects of Balmoral may be deceiving, if this was the truth for the employees? This disturbing inquiry takes us to the story's core, where the castle takes on the role of a character with secrets that only a select few were ever supposed to know. The mysteries of the castle were at last unveiled. An aura of secrecy has always surrounded Balmoral Castle, which is cloaked in heritage and shrouded in mist. It seemed eternal to the outer world. Its grounds were expansive, featuring animals, trees, and rivers that appeared completely unaffected by the passage of time, and its grey stone walls stood firm against the backdrop of the Scottish Highlands. However, Balmoral was home to clandestine truths that were hardly spoken outside of the building. Rumors started circulating over time, passed down from previous employees, and eventually appeared in books, documentaries, and casual conversations. The castle's hidden depths illuminated its multi-purpose nature, serving as a summer hideaway and beyond. Everyday life was influenced by unwritten norms, concealed customs, and even quiet anxieties. Extremely stringent environmental controls stood out as one of the harsh realities. Inside Balmoral, every sound, movement, and detail had to be in perfect harmony with tradition. The construction remained same, even when members of the royal family visited for leisure. The personnel was highly skilled at disappearing and reappearing at precisely the right times, all while giving the impression of effortlessness. However, that deception belied an abundance of practice and meticulous planning. There was no randomness in any of it. Because of this understanding, Balmoral took on an almost dramatic air. On this stage, the royal family played the lead roles, while the commoners played the supporting ones from which they could never really escape. Staff members who professed to have discovered secret corridors and rooms also circulated rumors about them. Even though most people had forgotten about them, some reported that for reasons that were never revealed, certain areas were walled off, and that no one dared to question the barred doors. Even though the castle has a long and storied past, these little mysteries added an unsettling air, as if the structure concealed secrets the royal family would rather keep hidden. The fact that Balmoral served as both a residence and a maze of secret passages only served to heighten the horrifying sensation that the staff was a part of something more stranger and bigger than anything they had ever anticipated. The castle's eerie quiet, more than its architecture, was its most eerie secret. To escape the prying eyes of the public, the royal family would retreat to Balmoral. The press was kept out of a private stage. There was an unwritten norm among employees that originated from the need for privacy. The events of Balmoral were not shared with anyone. The maids felt even more confined by the need to remain silent. Secrets, conflicts, and family problems were all on display for them to see. However, they were obligated to keep quiet about them out of devotion. That weight was heavy not due to the events per se, but rather to the continual confirmation that their opinions were ignored. Their role was to stand by silently, taking no part in the proceedings. It was as if the very landscape itself held the key to these mysteries. Isolation accompanied the calm that the Scottish Highlands gave. Several employees remarked on how the scenery seemed to go on forever, seemingly with no end in sight. The mountains glistened, and the rivers flowed with song on sunny days. Misty nights, nevertheless, gave the estate an eerie air, as if the ground itself hid the secrets of countless tales passed down through the generations. Those who were already dealing with their own personal issues found that Balmoral was more than simply a place of employment. It was a mystery that seemed to be alive and well in this setting. The public's perception of Balmoral shifted as these facts became public knowledge. It was more than just the Queen's beloved retreat anymore. Contrasting with the royals' joy, The staff's spooky secrecy and quiet suffering made it a symbol of contrast. Not everyone who heard the revelations was disturbed. The idea of living in a royal palace was made people wonder what it was really like. Given the complex nature of Balmoral, one wonders how much of the royal family's existence rested on well-guarded illusions. Although the castle's pristine reputation has been tarnished, it still stands tall and proud. The legend of Balmoral faded with each departing maid, whispered tale, and revealed fact. Along with the growing difficulty of concealing the secrets, a greater truth emerged. One that could not be confined inside the confines of royal traditions or stone walls. The tales of the Balmoral Maids serve as a reminder that the unsung heroes behind every great tradition are the ones who toil in the background. Work wasn't the only thing that caused them trouble. Dignity, the price of silence, and the strength to separate oneself were significant themes. They leave that legacy with their voices. The maid has decided to quit Balmoral Castle. What are your thoughts on this matter? Is their welfare more important than following tradition? On the other hand, was fleeing the scene their sole option? If you want more videos, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and press the bell icon. Thanks for watching.